So we'll go ahead and get started at this month's New American Task Force meeting. This is so great to have everyone joining us today. We're excited. We were just talking earlier that is the end of the legislative session, and there's a lot of things going on. So we're really grateful today to have some speakers, guest speakers who will went down with us. Some of the legislation that is passed that has some implications for the New American Task Force. And I think that some of them, although it might not be directly affecting New Americans, there's always intersectionalities, and it's important for us to have a really good understanding of laws that is passed and how it might affect how we live a life in the state of Utah. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just really quickly run through our agenda today. We will have a task force update and announcements by Natalie, followed by a legislative update. I'll do some introduction to a great speakers today. We'll also provide a rundown of the Immigration Day on the Hill, which was a great success in March. Was it March? Was it March? It's been March. It's been one of those very busy several months. And then we'll conclude with some discussions and closing remarks.
Great, thank you, Z. I'll just start off real quick and do a quick highlight of what the New Americans Task Force is and a few of the updates that we have. We always have new people who are joining us every month from the task force, and the task force is a joint initiative with the Center for Economic Opportunity and Belonging and the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, Center for Immigration and Integration that I run here, really as an opportunity for us to engage with stakeholders statewide, which represent nonprofits, businesses, industry associations, state and local government, faith-based communities, and individuals, to really share and inform on the opportunities related to immigration in the state, as well as some of the barriers and areas of focus for us to dig into even more so. So the task force has been around since 2022, and we're just going on our second year anniversary of the task force here in May. And so in that time, we've gone from 75 stakeholders to 175 stakeholders, and now we're at well over 200 stakeholders across the state. So these webinars are a really important opportunity for us to be able to disseminate information, share, and get your feedback. That being said, we recognize that we're due for an update on our progress from the report that we released last year and some of the priority areas. So we are working on an update to the recommendations that we all had received from you in 2022. And our next New Americans Task Force will be an opportunity for us to look at where we're at and where we're going, and engage in some meaningful dialogue with you all. So all that to say, just wanted to kind of thank you all for your participation and continuing to joining us for the task force every month. And you'll be hearing and seeing more from us in terms of some of the concrete updates on the recommendations that we put forward and what we've done. With that, we wanted to share a couple announcements of community events that we're working on here with the Center for Immigration and Integration. Tomorrow, we have an event with Intermountain Health regarding career opportunities in healthcare. As we all know, there's many people who come to the United States with an education or background in the healthcare field and or who are interested in getting into that field. So Intermountain has graciously opened up their space and is pulling in some of their experts for the different career pathways that they offer within Intermountain Health. And so we'd love for you to share this event within your communities. And there's a QR code for registration tomorrow evening at their campus just over on in Murray, their kind of main campus that's over in Murray. So hopefully you guys can share this, and this it'll be a really important opportunity for us to highlight some of those career pathways and opportunities. Next slide. And then along those lines, we also have one for internationally trained teachers that we're working with Utah State Board of Education on. That will be later in April, and we'll share the flyer once we get that from USBE. But we'll be hosting a panel presentation with USBE and different school district leads across the state to learn about what some of those pathways are to enter into an education field, whether you're an educator who came to the United States with that training and a degree, or if you're interested in pursuing that career as well. So again, this is all in the global talent kind of space of the task force and some different initiatives that we've been working on. So please share these far and wide with the folks that you serve. And with that, Z, I'll turn it back over to you to get us started with our presentation.
Thank you so much, Nally. And so we're really grateful today to have some guest speakers to explain to us what passed this legislative session. Two partner agencies will be joining us today. The first is Equality Utah, and we have two phenomenal partners from Equality Utah who will be joining us. First is Marina Lowe, who is the policy director at Equality Utah. Apologies, my note just went away. Marina advocates for and advancing the rights of LGBTQ communities in Utah. In this role, she cultivates relationship with elected officials from U.S. Congress members, senator to state legislatures, to local and city council members across the state to further LGBTQ equality in Utah. Joining her is Olivia Hamilos. Sorry, Olivia, I butchered that. She is a social psychology researcher and strategic leadership consultant. She is currently director of public outreach and training at Equality Utah. She was born and raised in Mexico. She's a retired United States Air Force veteran where she served on the tour to Iraq, Europe, humanitarian missions to Africa. Thank you so much for your service as well, Olivia. Next is a partner from Voices for Utah Children. If we could advance the next slide, please. Thank you. And from Voices for Utah Children, we're really grateful to have Syriac Alvarez Valle. She is the Senior Policy Analysis of Children's Health, Immigrant, and Family Policies. Syriac graduated with a BS degree in Political Science and Society from the University of Utah. She is also a community organizer, a poet, and a writer, a woman of many trades. Thanks for joining us, Syriac. Thais Rio is the second representative from Voices for Utah Children. She is the policy analyst at Children's Health at Voices for Utah Children. She's also a graduate of the University of Utah, and prior to joining Voices, Thais worked for the Office of Legislative Researcher and General Counsel. So please join me in welcoming and giving applause to our presenters today. Thank you so much. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Equality Utah with Marina and Olivia. If you could share with us some of the bills that was passed and just explain what the implication of those bills are.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us today. It's wonderful to be with all of you, and I will try and share just a little snapshot of some of the work that we did during the legislative session. It was a really tough legislative session. I'll just start out by saying that, and I don't think that's just unique to Equality Utah. I think many organizations felt like this was a tough legislative year. There are a lot of things that sort of go into that. I think, we're in an election year. Increasingly, we're living in a country that feels very divided and very partisan, and we have a really quick legislative session too, just 45 days. And so you put all of that together and it makes for a challenging 45 days, but nonetheless, there were still some successes and some low points, but some highlights that I'd like to share with you. We at Equality Utah track a number of different bills. I'm just going to pick a few to share with you today. The first two that I'm going to talk about were probably the bills that we had to spend the most amount of time on. And I should say also, Olivia is going to jump in and sort of interrupt me as we go to add some color and context to some of this legislation. So Olivia, please feel free as I'm speaking to weigh in as well. So the first bill that we worked on substantially garnered a ton of headlines. This was HB 257. It was known as the so-called bathroom bill. This was a piece of legislation that was passed within the first 2 weeks of the legislative session, signed by the governor, and went into effect almost immediately. And this is not a bill that's actually unique to Utah. Like so many bills that we're seeing these days targeting the LGBTQ community, these tend to be bills that develop in one state and then make their way across the country and get sort of reformatted state by state. And so this was a bill that came out of a number of different states, Kansas most notably, and it was called initially this idea, the Women's Bill of Rights. And the framing on this was really important. The idea was very clearly to target the trans community, but it was characterized in a way to make it seem like it was a bill to protect women. And I think that's really harmful and important for us to sort of flag. There were two real parts to the bill, two different areas that the bill targets. And this is, I'm speaking to the final legislation that passed, the final language that passed. So the first has to do with what we consider to be publicly owned buildings. So things like the Capitol building, the county building, the city buildings, parks, things like that, buildings that are owned by the government. And in those spaces, the bill restricts access to changing rooms and locker rooms, not bathrooms, just changing rooms and locker rooms. That's really important because so much of the discussion around this bill focused on bathrooms. And the reality is in those spaces, publicly owned spaces, it's only changing rooms and locker rooms that there are restrictions for trans individuals. Now, the other part of the bill had to do with the K through 12 public education system. In those spaces, bathrooms, changing rooms, and locker rooms are restricted in the K through 12 environment. There are a few exceptions. There's exceptions if there are medical reasons, and also if a student specifically asks for and requests access to a single stall, then they're able to be granted that access. So I just want to stress one more time, this bill does not apply in the private sector. This is really important because oftentimes when we think about public restrooms, we think about shopping malls, gas stations, grocery stores. Those are not publicly owned spaces. Those are privately owned. And so this bill has zero effect on any of those spaces. The only bathrooms that are really affected by this bill, the so-called bathroom bill, are K through 12 public school settings. Any other publicly owned building, it just has impact if there is a changing room or locker room. I do want to just end the discussion on this bill by stating that, while we were successful at Equality Utah in really narrowing the scope of this bill, because originally it did apply to bathrooms sort of across the board, we still feel that this bill is really harmful and has a chilling effect in a variety of different ways. We are worried about the chilling effect this will have on people feeling comfortable using the bathrooms, whether or not those bathrooms are actually restricted by the law. And furthermore, we're really worried about this idea of allowing and encouraging the public to engage in policing people's appearance based on the way that they look, based on gender stereotypes. And, this is not just a theoretical fear. Many of you may have seen reports in the news recently of individuals in our state calling out girls in a school setting, high school athletes, and claiming that they're not actually females based on their appearance. So we know that this is something that is happening and is likely to sort of pick up with the introduction of legislation like HB 257. I'm going to move on to the next bill that dominated a lot of our efforts during the legislative session. This is a bill called SB 150, Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And this is a really important idea. What the bill does essentially is put in place sort of a framework for evaluating situations when you have, on one hand, somebody's sincerely held religious belief, and on the other hand, some other law that conflicts with that religion. And I'll tell you the sort of origin of these, what we call RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, came about many years ago and had to do with an individual who smoked peyote pursuant to their religious belief. And that sort of bumped up against laws restricting the use of certain prohibited substances. So that was sort of the origin of this idea of what do we do when the First Amendment religious beliefs bump up against other laws that are sort of otherwise neutral on their face. And so what this bill does is it sort of elevates and says, when you have this sort of conflict that happens here in Utah, Generally, we will consider religion to prevail unless there are some sort of extreme circumstances. So it gives religion sort of an extra bump. Now, at Equality Utah, we were really concerned about the idea of giving extra preference to religion when it comes in conflict with other laws, because we saw in the wake of a pretty important Supreme Court decision called Hobby Lobby just a couple of years ago, where all of a sudden people, there was sort of this trend to use religion as a sword or as a means to justify discriminating against individuals, and in particular, the LGBTQ community. And so we went to the sponsor and requested that language be put into the bill to make clear that this bill, this elevating of religion over other rights, would not undo some of the very careful negotiation that Equality Utah worked so hard to put in place with some legislation we had passed in previous years, and most notably a bill in 2015 to make sure that people can't be discriminated against in terms of housing and in terms of employment simply because they happen to be LGBT or Q. And then last year, we passed a bill banning the use of conversion therapy on minors. And this is the practice for therapists to try and change somebody's sexual orientation or gender identity. So with the inclusion of that language, we felt a lot better about the passage of this bill, and it did pass both bodies unanimously. Another bill that I wanted to flag, HB 303, this is a bill called School Curriculum Amendments. This bill started out last year as a Don't Say Gay bill. These are, again, an example of a type of legislation that starts in one part of the country and then sort of moves its way across from state to state. It started in Florida, originally passed this idea of banning even the discussion of LGBTQ individuals, issues, et cetera, in a classroom setting. And we had real concerns with this type of legislation, what this means for teachers, for students to be able to discuss their families, to have photos of their families in a classroom setting, just to be able to talk about who they themselves are. And so we worked with a sponsor. He eventually changed the bill slightly. And the bill that was ultimately introduced in the Utah legislature this year talked about prohibiting endorsing, promoting, or disparaging political or social viewpoints. And we continue to have problems with this language. It's very vague, that terminology. Frankly, in this world that we all live in, for some people, things like climate change are actual facts, and other people consider those to be social viewpoints. And so we have real concerns about how this type of legislation might play out in the classroom setting. Luckily, the bill did fail. On the last night of the session, they actually attempted to sort of resuscitate the bill a couple of times on the last night of the session, trying to put in some language to ban pride flags in classrooms. But the bill did die. We expect to see this issue come back up again next session, so we'll be keeping our eye closely on it. I wanted to switch over and talk about, let's see what the time is. I think we're okay. A couple of bills in the workplace setting, because I think these are sort of important to flag. Two bills in particular, HB 396, Workplace Discrimination Amendments. This is another bill that deals with this intersection of religious freedom and sort of the rights of everybody else in the workplace. The bill actually codifies a Supreme Court decision called Groff versus DeJoy, which was decided by the Supreme Court in 2023. It was a 9-0 decision, so unanimous by the Supreme Court, which is sort of unusual these days. And that case dealt with a evangelical postal worker who had very strong religious convictions that made it difficult for this individual to work on Sundays, which normally wouldn't be a problem. In the United States, we generally don't get mail delivered on Sundays. But the Postal Service had entered into an agreement with Amazon to start delivering packages on Sunday. And so this posed a real problem for this particular evangelical worker. And so the Supreme Court decided in a 9-0 decision, as I mentioned before, that this would unduly burden this particular individual's religious beliefs, and that the employer really did need to accommodate those beliefs and arrange his schedule in such a way that he wouldn't have to compromise when it came to following his religious tenets. So this bill now applies to all employers in the state of Utah, both private and public sector employees, to the extent that they're covered currently under the Utah anti-discrimination statute. And sort of importantly, this bill applies to all employers regardless of size. So even if you happen to be a very small employer, just a handful of employees, you nonetheless have to now make accommodations for religious employees in the workplace. And then finally, sort of a follow-up to that bill, HB 460, Government Employee Conscience Protection Amendments. This bill is similar to the bill I just mentioned, but now allows for public sector employees, so this is just government employees, people who work for the government, work for universities that are publicly owned, to opt out of doing a particular task or assignment, so not their entire job, but just a task or assignment, either if it violates their religious belief or their conscience. And this is the part that feels very extreme to me. Conscience is defined as just feeling the rightness or wrongness of a particular action. So, this to me feels like a very dangerous piece of legislation in terms of people will be able to go to their public employers and say that they don't want to do a variety of tasks just because they don't feel that it's right or they feel that it's wrong to them. My own personal feelings when it comes to working for the government is that the government's open to everybody. And if you can't feel like you can serve everyone, then you should probably find a job that isn't part of the government. I'm going to quickly end on two different bills, and I know Olivia is probably going to weigh in on these because these touch on some aspects of the work that we do at Equality Utah and that she specifically does at Equality Utah. One of these is a big headliner bill, and the other not so much, was a little quieter. The first was HB 261, Equal Opportunity Initiative. This was another bill that was rushed through during the first 2 weeks of the session, along with the bathroom bill. Seems to be increasingly a strategy the legislature uses when dealing with really controversial pieces of legislation. And this bill was sort of more colloquially known as the anti-DEI bill. So this bill applies to higher education, K through 12 public education, and other government employees, so public sector employees. Goes into effect July of this year and does a variety of things. It prohibits requiring diversity statements in hiring and the attendance of certain DEI trainings. It prohibits using an individual's personal identity characteristics, and these are things like your sex, your race, your gender, etc., in decisions regarding employment and education, and it prohibits establishing or maintaining a DEI office. It requires higher education to conduct annual training on free speech, viewpoint diversity, etc. It institutes in the place of DEI offices what's known as student success programs that have to be open to all rather than open just to certain students based on their so-called personal identity characteristics. And importantly, it eliminates the terms DEI from public agencies, including higher education and K through 12 public education. And I think really, the story on this bill is, not over. We don't quite know how this bill is going to be implemented, what the impacts are going to be. And so there are, I think, real question marks about what this will mean for our diverse communities currently on college campuses across the state, on K through 12 campuses, and furthermore, what it means in government offices. And I don't know, Olivia, if you want to add in anything to the discussion of that bill.
Yes, it's thank you, Marina. I mean, it's really important what's happening up at the Utah State Legislature when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And at Equality Utah, we also have an education program that very much takes the road that DEI looks to take of maybe building an understanding, but that is where we really have looked to take that different perspective, that we really look to build the belonging where it needs to. And we're really intentional about getting into the spaces where conversations need to be had about this. And we've been successful to the point where some of our biggest partners include Morgan Stanley, Recursion, Progressive Leasing, even the Utah Jazz. And one thing that I've been noticing, especially as this bill it came out in the news and more information came out about it, one of the biggest things that we saw is that companies are not willing to budge on their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And they have a lot of questions for the legislature when it comes to how this is going to look like. Especially, I think we're going to talk about HB 111, right? So when it comes to intervening into the private sector, that is where you see that there is a difference. I don't know if you want to speak on HB 111, Marina.
Yes, sorry, just looking for my mute button. Yes, thank you. That's a good segue, Olivia. I'll talk briefly about HB 111, and then you're welcome to pick back up talking about how it intersects with the work that we do. So HB 111 is sort of the private sector corollary to HB 261. So HB 261, the big anti-DEI bill, applies in the public sector. HB 111 had to do with targeting DEI training when it comes to private employers. So it prohibited compelling or requiring adherence with certain beliefs or concepts in the course of a DEI training. It would have applied to any employer other than those that have fewer than 15 employees. And ultimately, this bill was amended a couple of times. And I think the reason that it was amended and then eventually actually failed is for the reason that I think Olivia was just about to get into, that there was real concern about the legislature stepping into the private sector in particular. It was one thing for them to say to sort of public institutions, here's what we want you to do and not do when it comes to DEI training. But it felt like a very unprecedented event to have the legislature start to tell private employees what they can and can't do. And, you know, for example, many private companies do have their own culture and beliefs. And, you know, if I don't know if anybody's ever gone to the Google campus in Northern California, but there's a real feel there that comes from the top down. And that is the right of that private company to express their own particular workplace flavor. So anyway, that bill did not pass, and I'll let Olivia talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, and I mean, thank you, Marina. And that bill did not pass, which is good, but it definitely showed us that the private sector does have that power of opinion, that so many people did express that many of their workers, many of their employees stated that they weren't comfortable perhaps staying in Utah if this were to pass. And you just see how we can come to find more understanding on these issues, and hopefully that is something that we continue to do as these bills, more information came out about them. They would continuously reach out to our organization for guidance on what to do if they had to do anything. Fortunately, you know, Marina is amazing, and she was able to build great relationships with the legislature that for years, after a while, it really looks to build that communication, and it really helped us in these efforts. But as we move forward, if anybody here has any questions in terms of like their own company, their own business, we would love to answer those questions. You can reach us at Equality Utah. You can follow us on social media as well, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. We do put a lot of information when it comes to legislative efforts. However, we also do a lot of information regarding our education program, and we'd love to see what we can do to, you know, further that education and bridge that gap of, you know, sometimes people, they just don't know what they don't know. And when we really take that approach, we start seeing a different side in people, and it's been so successful. I'd love to connect with anybody on this call. My email is olivia@equalityutah.org, and we'd love to take any questions. Anything else, Marina?
Sorry, my mute button's so hard to find on my phone. My computer was having issues before this call, so I had to resort to the phone. No, I think that completes you know, the bills that are probably important for us to chat about today. But yes, happy to answer any questions. We can either take them now or we can take them at the end of the call as well.
Well, thank you so much, Marina and Olivia, for that really great summary of the bills that you have worked on. And you guys do just amazing work throughout the legislative session. There's so much things going on, as you refer to, in 45 days. And it's just like tennis balls. The rackets is coming nonstop, right, for all of those times. So really appreciate that. And as you alluded to earlier in your presentation, is one of the most challenging, I think, legislative sessions, because there were so many bills that has potential implications for communities of color and other communities throughout the state of Utah. And your work in the Hill has made a huge difference. So thank you so much for your work. I would like to see if there is any questions from the audience before we move to the next set of speakers. There was a lot covered, and we want to make sure that we address some of those questions. And feel free to just unmute yourself. There is one question on the chat about a summary document, and I think we could pull a summary document together to share with this group.
Yes, absolutely. We can definitely do that.
Don't be shy. Feel free to just unmute yourself or put your questions on the chat. While they're thinking about the questions or maybe pending, I do also want to plug in the training that Equality Utah does in the community. They do a phenomenal job. If you haven't seen their trainings yet, I would recommend that you follow them on their website or social media and find out. I have the great fortune of attending some of those trainings, and it's just phenomenal. And if you work for a company and are interested in hosting a training, I also encourage you to reach out to Olivia. They do also do work statewide, so it's not just in Salt Lake County. We partner with them several times in other parts of the state. So our task force is also statewide, and would love to make sure that we're connected that beyond just the Wasatch Front.
Yeah, we'd love to connect with everybody. I was trying to drop my email into the chat, but it wouldn't let me. So if somebody could just drop my email into the chat, I'd love to take some information from y'all.
I just have one more question, both for you and then for our next set of presenters. You know, every year, kind of gearing up for what's to come in the session, and if people want to get engaged earlier on versus, you know, on January, whatever it's going to be this year that it starts, or next year, how would people stay engaged? What is your best recommendation, both for these issues and then similar to Syriac and Thais for issues related to immigrants? What's your advice there for people who kind of hear about things after the fact versus before or during?
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, Natalie. It's so important to get involved before January, because the challenge really is once the legislature starts, it's just crazy. Legislators don't have time any longer to meet with individuals. Everybody's kind of drinking from the fire hose during these crazy 45 days. So really the best way to get involved and get connected is during the rest of the sort of the year. Utah is so unique in that we have this very short 45-day legislative session, which has its pluses and minuses. But the plus is that for most of the year, legislators are not in active session, and same with advocates and groups like ours. Our work is sort of shifts into a different mode. And so it's a really wonderful time to either get connected with organizations that work on issues that you might care about, to get to know who your legislators are personally. The other wonderful thing about a part-time legislature like ours is that we don't have professional legislators who are surrounded by layers and layers of staff. You know, it's just them. They don't have any paid staff. And so it's really easy to reach out to them. Their emails and phone numbers are available on the legislative website. And, you know, I would encourage everybody on this call to, if you don't know who your legislators are, look them up right now, find out who your senator and representative are, send them an email, say, hey, I'm your constituent. I live in your area. I'd love to meet with you. I'd love to talk about issues that matter to me. If you have a proposal for an idea that you think should be law, where legislators get most of their bill ideas is from you and me, from their constituents, people who have an issue or a problem in their life that could be solved by changing the law, oftentimes just in a small way. So I would really just suggest doing that sort of work ahead of time, reaching out to your legislator. And I think you'll be really surprised that when they're not so crazy and busy during the session, they're happy to meet with you and talk with you. And then you've established a relationship so that in January, when something really bugs you or you're reading about something in the newspaper, it's much easier to go back and say, hey, remember me? We went and grabbed coffee and talked about this issue that mattered to me. Well, I just wanted to let you know how I feel about this issue as well.
Thank you. And we do have a question on the chat. Is the tone at the Capitol changing to be less diversity friendly? There was so much coming through this session that is hard to track whether there are shifts we should be prepared to respond to over the next year.
I do think there has been a dramatic shift at the Capitol. And, you know, I mean, whether it's less diversity friendly or just straight up mean, I have noticed a tone shift for sure. And to me, this happened probably most notably in 2022. So this was the year that nationally, I think there was sort of a little bit more of a blue wave that than people had been expecting. But here in Utah, we saw the opposite. And what we saw was really the loss of a lot of moderate Republicans. And so what I think we saw was then an increase in sort of very extreme conservative right-wing voices. The loss of those folks in the middle who, when they cobbled together votes with Democrats and others, had sort of a moderating effect on those sort of far right voices. So that's the dynamic that I increasingly am seeing up at the Capitol, and makes it very, very hard to find compromise, to sort of tone down the rough edges. And, you know, you can see this play out very clearly. For example, I think it was in the 2022 session, we saw the introduction of a bill on vouchers, and the governor indicated that he was not supportive. The moderate R's stood by him, and that bill did not succeed. The next year, once the legislature had sort of no longer had a lot of those moderate R's in the middle, that bill sailed through. And the governor didn't even have a chance to veto it because the numbers were so high in support of it that it would have been veto proof. So I think that point is very accurate. The legislature has changed, which behooves all of us to figure out ways to get out the vote, encourage other people to put their hat in the ring and be willing to run for office. We just have to get a more moderate tone back on Capitol Hill.
That was really great advice, Marina. And I think that there's definitely work ahead of us, and it will be up to all of us to do our part. And I think this upcoming election, we need to all do a part to get people out to vote and get more moderates to run for office. Thank you so much again for that presentation. If you could stick around and see if there's any more questions towards the end. And now I would invite Syriac and Thais to come and share with us about some bills that are more specifically focused or have a more direct impact on the immigrant population.
Thank you, Z. And thank you, Marina and Olivia.
Thank you so much. I learned so much, Marina and Olivia, so thank you for that really awesome summary. Hi, everyone. My name is Thais Rio. As Dee said, I am a policy analyst at Voices for Utah Children. We are a policy and advocacy nonprofit organization, and we focus on several different areas that impact Utah children and families. Syriac and I work in the children's health and immigrant family policy issue area. So we're here today, as Dee said, to talk more about a series of different bills that were either introduced or enacted this session that will impact the broader immigrant community here in Utah. So we do have a slide deck. I'm going to go ahead and share that with you all here in a second. Okay. Okay, can we see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, great. Well, I'll go ahead and maybe just lay out what we saw this session. I think in terms of an overarching theme, we definitely came in anticipating some harmful bills and just anticipating just scary stuff, especially when we look at what's happening nationwide in some states like Florida and Texas with these anti-immigrant policies. We were worried that Utah was going to have some similar pieces of legislation, but we didn't see that this session, at least to that level of extremism. But that's not to say that won't come about for next session. And so we are going to continue to monitor and to work with community partners and organizations so we can combat in case that does happen for this next session. But we did see a lot of really great bills that we'll be discussing here in a second that will definitely help the broader immigrant community access in the workforce and education sphere. So we're excited to touch on that. Syriac, anything that you'd like to add? Or else I can go ahead and go to the next slide.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
There you go.
Awesome. So we wanted to start off talking a bit about some of the bills that we were opposing and monitoring during the session. The first one being HB 165. This bill attempts to set a limit when federal officials, like people who are ICE workers, when they can release non-citizens into Utah. And even though this may be a requirement by the federal law or by the Constitution, this sets to try to limit when they can, and also asked for additional information to be shared. The biggest issue with this bill is that it is unconstitutional. It's preempted by federal law because it conflicts with federal law. So essentially, it will never be able to be implemented because of our federal government and the way that it works. But unfortunately, this really became a messaging bill because of the number of newcomers that have come into Utah and just the number of media, like news, that has really shown families that are coming. And unfortunately, there is an anti-immigrant rhetoric to these newcomers. And so we are really, one, focused on what kind of messaging it'll have on immigrant families and how they're perceived. And second, we, like Senator Escamilla, would really hope for wraparound services or programming that could be implemented or supported for some of these families that are coming in. And so unfortunately, that floor amendment that she tried to pursue did not pass, but we are going to continue to monitor this bill, especially because in Texas, there was a bill that would allow local law enforcement to be able to do federal law enforcement policies. So detention, deportation sort of work in Texas, and there's been some legal battle around whether or not they can, and just like a number of different, like legality to it, saying that they can, and then they can't, and then they can, and then they can't. So we're going to keep an eye on this bill, and then of course keeping an eye for next legislative session of any sort of bills that are going to come during the election cycle or because of the election cycle after, that has to do with some of that integration of both state and federal policies and working on immigration policies. The second bill that we were monitoring and opposing was HJR 12. This bill, one, has misleading information regarding immigrants, undocumented immigrants specifically, and the quote unquote burden that they have in our state and how much they are quote unquote costing, which are very untrue. And they actually use FAIR, a national conservative anti-immigrant organization, their numbers to use some of this information. And essentially, it just says that this is a resolution regarding how much, costs we're having for having undocumented immigrants, which again is not true. And it also adds a part that says that we should support HB 2, House Bill 2, which is Secure the Border Act. And this bill includes policies like resuming the construction of a border wall, limiting asylum, imposing penalties for overstaying visas, and other policies like this that we don't support. And so fortunately, this bill remained in rules, but unfortunately, it also began as a different resolution that would have tried to limit the ability for an undocumented child to be enrolled in the K through 12 education system. And again, it's anti-immigrant policies that we don't support and that we think are harmful, not only in conversation, rhetoric, but also in policy and practice. So we're going to continue to monitor these type of initiatives, these type of policies, especially because of the national rhetoric has really shifted with the number of asylum families that have been coming in. And unfortunately, it has really created a hostile environment for a number of immigrant families, not only in border states, but for states outside of the border. And so we're going to continue to work on this policy and really inform our legislators, inform our policymakers about the impact of these kind of resolutions and these kind of policies or these kind of legislations. And then the third bill that we wanted to touch on was HB 421, which is homelessness and vulnerable populations amendments. This was a huge bill on housing, homeless services that really changed some of the pieces on hospital contracts, duties of the Homeless Council, prioritization of shelters, Code Blue modifications, mitigation funding, and home court pilot programs. I won't get into all of it unless somebody's super interested. After, I can answer some questions, but basically the biggest piece that we are concerned about is the prioritization part, which is number 3, the prioritization of homeless shelters. And this calls the Homeless Council to establish standards for who they should prioritize at a given homeless shelter, and it does include 2 priorities. And these priorities are people who are TANF eligible or people who are leaving the state hospital to be prioritized over other people. Unfortunately, for mixed status families, this means that they may not be able to be prioritized, even if because their family may not be TANF eligible, but not necessarily be ineligible for other programs or other services. So this is something that we are really interested in trying to ensure that policymakers and this homeless council understands the impact of mixed status families. And the last thing I would say is that there is opportunity for other prioritizations to be made. Representative Elison did mention that another prioritization example could be a woman who's pregnant or small children. So I think there is opportunity for some changes or for some other ability to give families a different priority for other immigrant families or other families in general who may also need to be in some of these shelters. So with that, I will pass it to Thais to talk a little bit more about some of the other bills.
Thank you, Syriac. So despite some of those maybe, negative messaging bills or bills that intentionally or unintentionally aimed at excluding the immigrant community, there was some really great bills that came out of the session that will help expand employment and licensure opportunities for eligible immigrants. And this is what I wanted to touch on for this section here. So 2 bills that will increase and provide alternative pathways towards licensure is SB 26, Behavioral Health Licensing Amendments, and HB 58 Licensing Amendments. So to start off with SB 26, essentially this bill creates new licenses and certifications within the behavioral health field, and it'll introduce different and alternative pathways for individuals to be able to obtain licensure so they can enter the behavioral health workforce. So for some context on this bill, right now, before this bill was passed, the behavioral health workforce really just relies heavily on individuals who have advanced degrees to be able to provide care, which is great, but it does limit the number of eligible members of the workforce who can enter the field. And so by designing a new pathway for individuals to extend non-clinical or clinical behavioral health support, this bill is really aims at addressing that workforce shortfall and establishes new licenses and certifications for folks to be able to provide that non-clinical or clinical work as well. And so some of the licenses that will be introduced thanks to this bill is license of master addiction counselor, license of behavioral health coach, and other certifications such as behavioral health technicians. And so really another key aspect of this bill is that it'll help prospective candidates be able to obtain these licensures through alternative pathways that do not necessarily rely solely on exam results. And so this includes being able to qualify for licensure through increased direct client care hours and other like practical supervised clinical hours. And really this alternate pathway provides that flexibility for individuals who may have acquired that relevant experience in the past, but may not have followed the traditional educational or examination route. And so this is open for everyone, including internationally trained applicants. And then similar to this bill, HB 58, just opens up and expands the licensure through endorsement process to include all types of licenses. And so before this bill, endorsement for internationally trained professionals was only limited to a very specific type of licenses. And so other licenses in the field, such as behavioral health, engineering, dentistry, etc., had their own endorsement criteria that oftentimes excluded foreign licenses, foreign education and experience. And so these barriers made it difficult for eligible immigrants to be able to get into this workforce. And so with this bill now, it will open up endorsement for internationally trained applicants for all types of different professional areas. So that's really exciting. Really, these 2 bills is going to allow for that flexibility for entry into the workforce and allows just really allows individuals with that practical experience to enter the workforce more readily. It'll attract more individuals and really just benefit the community as a whole, especially as we see that the mental health space here in Utah, there's just a really high need for that. And so these two bills provide that, which is really exciting. See if there anything I wanted to touch on this. Let's see. No, I think that's it for these two bills. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Okay, and then I also wanted to touch on the education access piece as well, because I know education access is one of the priorities of the task force. So I wanted to make sure that we touched on these two bills and what happened with them during the session. So the first one is HB 172. This is student athlete participation amendments. It was sponsored by Representative Tusher, which did pass this session. And so this bill amends a law that was passed during last year's legislative session that required birth certificates or other identifying documents from high school students who wanted to participate in sports in their schools. And this bill, the bill that was passed last year, really just created a barrier for many immigrant and refugee students and homeless students who perhaps didn't have these documents readily accessible. And so there's a lot of community members, especially within the immigrant community, that raised these concerns to Representative Tusher, and he was able to bring it back this year to make that change, and we're really grateful for that. And so this new bill makes the required changes that will allow for that flexibility in the required documentations that students have to provide in order to participate in a school sport. So the requirements as to what these students can provide in addition to a birth certificate are outlined in the bill. But I'll take a second to sort of go through that. So if a student is not a U.S. citizen and they can't provide their birth certificate, they can provide an affidavit from the student's parent or legal guardian attesting the student's date of birth and their sex, and also stating there that the parent or legal guardian is unable to obtain a birth certificate. And apart from that, they have to also provide one of documents that are outlined in the bill. So some of these documents include either a religious, hospital, or physician certificate, a verified school record, a verified immunization record, or documentation from a social service provider. So this is a great cleanup bill, and it definitely addresses some of those barriers and concerns that immigrant, refugee students and homeless students were having. Another bill that I wanted to touch on, unfortunately, this bill did not pass this session, but I thought it was really important to bring up. This was HB 506, Higher Education Residency Amendments, sponsored by Representative Judkins. So to provide some context with this bill, last year, Representative Tusher passed HB 102, and this bill essentially expanded in-state tuition for students who have been granted either refugee, parolee, TPS, or asylum status, or if those students were in the process of obtaining those statuses. And so this bill joins HB 144, which passed in the early 2000s, that allows undocumented college students to receive in-state tuition. So really, it was a really exciting bill. Really exciting to know that the bill would, increase access towards higher education and reduce some of that financial burden, especially as tuition continues to increase. So that passed, that's been enacted. And so now we're here this session. Representative Judkins sponsored this bill that would essentially expanded in-state tuition for college students who hold either a T or U visa, or again are in the process of obtaining those that status. And for folks who may not know, a T visa is a type of non-immigrant visa for victims of human trafficking, and a U visa is also a non-immigrant visa available for individuals who were either a victim of a crime or witnessed a crime. The bill did pass the House, barely. It passed, it was a 39 to 24 vote, and you need 37 votes to pass. And so it did go through the House, barely. It went through the Senate, but unfortunately the bill just ran out of time and it didn't pass. But also there just wasn't a lot of advocacy behind this bill. And it was, I don't think many people really knew about this bill. And so it's definitely worth bringing back for this next session and maybe working with and identifying really a legislative champion that would be willing to sponsor this bill so that we can add more immigrant students to be able to qualify for in-state tuition. So go ahead.
Awesome. And then these last two slides, we just want to give a quick shout out to Senator Kwan and Representative Johnson, who did a Senate joint resolution and a House concurrent resolution to really celebrate communities of color. The first one being the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander cultures and community, and then the other one celebrating the history of welcoming refugees. So we just think these are really great to remember the people who are in our state, and really think that it's important to not only uplift the work that is done, but also just their cultures and communities and our welcoming nature as a state, especially as we could continue forward in this election cycle and in the upcoming legislative session. And with that celebration, I'll pass it back to Thais to talk about our Immigrant Day on the Hill. And then I do see a few questions.
Thanks, Syriac. Yes, so we really wanted to take this general session as an opportunity to invite community members up on the Hill. Many of those in the community, in the immigrant community, aren't aware that they can go up to the Capitol, don't have that access, or perhaps are scared. And so we wanted to create a space, a welcoming and supportive space to invite community members up here. And so we held, alongside some really amazing local and national partners, the very first Immigrant Day on the Hill. And really the purpose of the event was to celebrate, to educate, and to empower the community, especially the immigrant community, about the ways that they can get involved at the legislature. And we really just wanted to be able to highlight the positive impact and the diverse contributions that immigrants here in Utah have made. And so we took opportunity to celebrate culture. We had a variety of different performers there. You can see some of them here in the pictures. We also took time to highlight some of that economic contribution factor. We had several different poster boards talking about immigrants in the workforce, where immigrants in Utah are from, just like overview, a lot of really great data out there. I'm happy to share that with y'all as well. And also we just had a lot of hands-on interactive activities meant to help community members acquire skills in storytelling and advocacy, how to interact with their legislator, and also took some space to uplift the immigrant community and stories by having a booth called To Immigrants with Love. And so we had different postcards where members of the community and the attendees were able to write just messages of love and support. You can see some of them here on the screen. It was just a beautiful evening, coming together and being with one another, especially amidst the anti-immigrant rhetoric that is so pervasive, especially during an election year. It was really great to see the number of people that came to support. And so we're hoping to host another one next year. And if there are any of you who are interested, feel free to reach out to me and we can work on something together. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight this event. It was definitely the highlight of my session. And so it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. I also wanted to add that I did see a question or a comment about wanting a session before the next legislative session to understand the impact to advocate. And I just wanted to share that we also hosted 4 lobby days during the session, where we invited community members up to speak about bills, learn about the process, and really understand. So if you would like to contact us and be a part of whether it's the Immigrant Day on the Hill or lobby days, we invite you to contact us and we'd be happy to talk more and share more.
Well, thank you so much, Syriac and Thais, for that very comprehensive presentation. We do have a couple of questions on the chat. The first one is, how does HB 50A impact internationally trained physicians?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm looking at the question. I don't know exactly specifically for physicians, but Hannah, I can get you in contact with one of our partners who is looking into this bill and get more information on that for you. Sorry.
I can provide a little bit there too. It would provide a provisional license for physicians, so not a full license. And I will say that it's going to take quite a long time to get through the different special medical and healthcare pathways that they're working through. And so you're looking at 6 months to a year before they have kind of a provisional license pathway. But as Thais had mentioned, our friends over at the Department of Commerce and the professional licensing department are kind of slowly, it hasn't even been made effective yet. So they're kind of going to start peeling back the onion in terms of what that provisional licensing pathway would look like, but it will be a provisional license. So if you're in the licensing world, you know, it's not as good as a full license, but it's there and inching towards that direction.
Yeah,
Thanks, Denali.
like to send me your email. That way I can have your contact and I can connect you with someone from the office as well. I'm sure they'll have additional info there. And thank you, Natalie, for your help.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the next one is more of a statement than it is a question, but I just want to share in case people don't have access to the chat. HB 506 also applies to people who can demonstrate that they have filed an application for asylums. We'll go back to Amy's question just a little bit, but just another interaction on the chat with Fernando, who just said that there was also a recognition for the Salvadorian community, HCR 10, but it didn't pass. Hopefully we'll bring that up. But also just this around the question about, you know, getting to know the bills in advance. And we can, as a task force, try to maybe bring a workshop together and prior to the session, and just educate the community about the various bills that might be coming up in the 2025 legislative session. There is some trick to it because sometimes you don't find out about the bills until the last minute. So just a caveat there. I think the key is just give yourself embrace about what is happening in the community, and then utilize the resources that's already there, whether that is a day in the Hill with Voices for Utah Children. I know that Equality Utah also does a lot of education in the community as well, and we'll try to, as a task force, to inform this body of the various happenings in the legislative session. It does go quickly, and I think that the more that we're prepared to understand what's happening for 2025, the better we are as a community. And just building on the theme of, you know, some of the anti-immigration sentiments that we're seeing around the country. And I think this is something that we have to really pay attention to, especially the next legislative session, because we are seeing a trend. As many of you know, Utah has been leading out in the conversation as being a place where immigrants could thrive and succeed, and has been that welcoming effort. And we think we need to continue to maintain that positive narrative and momentum that we have built for the past 15 years, especially with the pass of the Compact on Immigration. If we lose sight of that, we might be the anti-immigrant sentiment around the nation might hit us. And so just being very proactive in terms of the space, working with our partners in the community, and continue to talk about the positive contributions of immigrants to our society, to our workforce, to our economy, but just to the fabric of a community, and really plays to the value of who we are as a community. I was reminded today that in 2006, the largest demonstration in the state of Utah was people coming out, about 40,000 people coming out to support immigrants in the state of Utah. And that is huge, right? And people forget that this is that we have a strong history and commitment as a state to supporting immigrants, welcoming immigrants in the community, and making sure that they feel like belong. And we cannot. I think if there's any time in the current day that we need to really step up and remind communities of the values that we share, this is the time for us to do so. So I just want to plug it in there that this is not just the 45 days, this is work year round, and we need all of you to be engaged in this process. Any other questions that you might have for our panelists?
Z, if I may, as we wait for some questions, I put it in the chat here. I don't know if someone can share it with everyone else, but for folks who want to know more about how the legislature works, and there's just a lot of things, it can be confusing and intimidating. So I did add some resources there that can help folks learn more about the process itself. And I shared that here in the chat. Thank you, Natalie.
Sorry, I'm not sure why you all can't chat, but everybody else can chat and see that. So I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we head to the next step? One other plugin I think is important for us to think about too, although, this is the New American Task Force, and oftentimes we just focus on bills that are specifically affecting immigrants. And as we presented today with the bills that is shared by Equality Utah, there is so much intersectionalities, and the bills affects all of us. And we have to be able to build those allyships and unity in terms of making sure that we are building an environment, not just immigrants belong, but everyone belongs. And thinking about the intersectionalities of all of our lived experiences and the shared experiences as a community. So I want to again thank Marina and Olivia from Equality Utah, who share with us some of the more high level and controversial bills, I would say. And then Syriac and Thais for helping us to track the immigrant bills that are more affecting our immigrant communities. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. We'll share a summary of the presentation from Equality Utah, as well as Voices for Utah Children, as part of a follow-ups to this webinar. And with that, we'll probably transition to the next portion of our program. Thank you so much again, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
And just to wrap us up here, we do have a slide that has everybody's contact information on it and a QR code here to join the New Americans Task Force if you're not already a member. Our next webinar will be on May 16th, and we'll be recapping kind of a highlight of what we've accomplished with the task force and the report and recommendations that we released last year. And there's been quite a bit of work that's been done over the past 12 to 18 months or so. It's been really impressive as we're kind of capturing all of the incredible work from the field and from the state and local partners and everyone else. And that's on May 16th. So with our email, when we send out the slide deck and the recording, there'll also be a link to register for that dialogue session. So thank you all for joining us today. Feel free to reach out to Z's team at the Center for Economic Opportunity and Belonging, or to me or Claudia. If you have any questions, suggestions for future topics, or other areas that you'd like us to see dig into, we're here to kind of create some bridges and connect communities overall as it relates to New Americans in Utah. So thank you all. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.